Today we will talk about how the Ultramarines already felt the treacherous stab for themselves. Immediately after the slaughter in the drop site massacre on Istvan V, Horus began the implementation of his plan to besiege Terra. However, the warrior realized that the Ultramar system under the control of his brother Rabut Guilliman could become the force that would strangle his rebellion almost at its inception. The empire within an empire, as Ultramar is also called, needed to be weakened and ideally destroyed altogether. That is why, even before the events in the Istvan system, Horus tasked Rabut Guilliman with assembling forces for a campaign in a sector far from Ultramar. The task of destroying the homeland of the 13th Legion was assigned to Lorgar and Angron. The former had long held a grudge against the 13th Legion for the humiliation on the planet Monarchia, while the latter simply went mad with bloodlust, making Angron perfectly suited for the mission to spread terror and panic in the home system of the Ultramarines. Both the World Eaters and the Word Bearers possessed an impressive fleet, and together they formed an invincible armada. The beginning of their campaign could still be traced through the thoroughly butchered planets and destroyed ships in space. The World Eater Berserkers and a special unit of the Word-Bearers called the Gal Vorbak, demon-possessed marines, methodically exterminated the population of the Ultramar border planets. At first, few saw the sense in such large-scale slaughter. However, it later turned out that this was an attempt to appease the Dark Gods, and a quite successful one at that. The advancement of the 12th and 17th Legion's armada remained unnoticed for a long time, due to the warp storms that had engulfed the Imperium. The dying worlds had no way of sending distress signals to neighbouring Imperial planets. However, the traitors could easily travel through the warp, without fear of demon attacks. Soon, the heretics' fleet reached the planet Honorum. It was a beacon of Imperial civilization on the very edge of the galaxy. Beyond it was only the space known as the Ruin Storm, an unexplored territory of space where warp storms constantly raged. It was these that Lorgar intended to use. The defense of Honorum was crushed by the might of the traitors' fleets and the destructive assault on the main fortresses. The battle was so horrifying that Honorum could not fully recover even 10,000 years after the attack. Meanwhile, the traitors' fleet was able to freely move beyond the known space, passing through the strongest warp storms without hindrance. This was thanks to Erebus, the chief chaplain of the Word-Bearers, who by that time had renounced the worship of the Emperor and became a dark apostle. His prayers to the malevolent forces and the millions of sacrifices gained the favour of chaos, and therefore the fleet was almost unthreatened in its transitions through the warp. Occasionally, the fleet emerged from the Immaterium to raid border worlds and nearby merchant fleets, but it did not allow itself to be distracted from the main goal. Using the knowledge found on the raided ships and within the minds of the pilots, the traitors were able to more precisely develop a strategy for the upcoming attack. Upon finally arriving at the very heart of Ultramar, the Primarchs decided to disperse their forces throughout the system. Angron and Lorgar, with a small but powerful fragment of the fleet, set off to storm the military centre of the Empire of Guilliman, the planet of Armatura. Zadkiel, the captain of the Word-Bearers, headed for the system's capital, the planet of Macraga, while Lorgar's closest associates, Cor Phaeron and Erebus, went to the planet of Calth. Small forces of the World Eaters were also dispersed throughout the system, given only one command: to kill everything they saw. This added additional confusion and terror among the population of Ultramar. Calth was the main dock for the powerful fleet of Ultramarines, and thus attacking it head-on would have been suicidal. It was here that the genius of the Primarch's mind shone through. Not far from Calth was a mobile space base named Kona. Even before the arrival of the Word-Bearers' fleet, it was already empty. The entire crew had been destroyed. Whether it was a psyker gone mad on board the base or an attack by the demons of chaos was unknown. It was only known that a traitor Primarch was to blame. The station was captured by the arriving Word-Bearers, and it was at this moment that the blade of betrayal was held over Calth. The thing was, in Ultramar they still did not know about the betrayal of Horus and the legions loyal to him. nor were they aware of the attacks in other parts of the sector due to warp storms. Therefore, the appearance of the word-bearers near Calth did not arouse suspicion. A small delegation of traitors even visited one of the Ultramarines' cruisers for an exchange of courtesies. At this point, Lorgar's plan began to unfold. Using the sorcery of the warp, the 17th Legion stealthily set Conor in motion. The station accelerated to near light speeds and was directed straight at the space dock, located above the planet. In just a few seconds, the dock and hundreds of ships, from light scouts to giant cruisers built even before Reboot was found by the Emperor, were consumed by a monstrous explosion. Conor passed through the ships like a knife through butter, exploding right in orbit of the planet. Those ships that were not hit, due to the pulse after the explosion, instantly lost any connection with the fleet and the planet beneath them. The crew lost their vision, not having time to close the shutters of their ship's windows. The huge Ultramarines cruiser Antradamicus survived the fiery storm but lost control and was pulled into the planet's gravitational well, crashing onto its surface. Its mass destroyed part of the capital of Calth and the main communications hub of the Mechanicum. In a matter of seconds, the heretics took millions of lives with a single blow. Panic set in among the forces loyal to the Imperium. The surviving officers either had no communication with their troops or did not know what to do. Through the few remaining Vox channels, only pleas for help and rescue were heard. The skies above the planet blazed, and no one could have guessed that it was a treacherous attack by Lorgar's Legion. This is what Calth greeted Reboot Guilliman with, as he arrived in the system to replenish his troops. Looking over the wreckage of ships in this dark hour, Guilliman still hoped that it was all just a mistake, a misunderstanding. Perhaps, he thought, the word-bearers assumed that an enemy had destroyed the space dock and had opened fire blindly at the ships that appeared. The very idea that the creations of the Emperor could raise a sword against their brothers did not fit in Guilliman's mind. He tried to contact the fleet of the 17th Legion to clarify the situation, but no one intended to answer. Instead, the Ultramarines' fleet encountered intense fire from the word-bearers' ships. With each passing minute, the Ultramarines lost their ships, but Reboot did not cease his attempts to contact Lorgar. At last, when the channel stabilized somewhat, and Reboot appealed to his brother with a plea to cease fire, he was met with only the darkest of curses. Only then did the Primarch of the 13th Legion realize what was happening in orbit around Calth. With a heavy heart, he gave the order for retaliatory measures, up to the destruction of the word-bearers' fleet. At that moment, his portion was conducting a bombardment of the defenseless cities of Calth, completely sweeping away the major island cities in the south of the planet. The word-bearers were preparing themselves a beachhead for an attack on the capital, Numinous. Sometime later, Lorgar re-established contact with the Primarch of the Ultramarines. He told his brother that this treacherous attack was not a retaliatory measure for the humiliation at Monarchia. It was a full-scale rebellion of a warrior against his father. He also informed Reboot that 3 of the loyal Primarchs had already met their death at the hands of the traitors, and Guilliman would be next. As it would later turn out, Lorgar was mistaken about the death of some of his brothers. Nonetheless, after this conversation, the officers of the Ultramarines saw their Primarch in such a ferocious rage for the first time. Guilliman threatened his brother with retribution, but Lorgar only smirked. Suddenly, a strange, nightmarish creature appeared on the deck. None of the Space Marines had ever seen it before, and before those present could react in any way to it, the creature exploded itself, compromising the integrity of the command deck. Primarchs and some of the Space Marines were thrown into the cold vacuum of space, while the Ultramarines' flagship began to fill with unseen monsters, later named the Demons of Chaos. The first to guess the true nature of the demons, in the sense that they were not just unusual beings but reflections of human nightmares, was an Ultramarine sergeant named Eonid Thiel. He was also the first to notice that power weapons were much more effective against demons than regular weapons. Although the unexpected attack by the unknown enemy caused confusion among the 13th Legion, resistance was quickly organized throughout the flagship. After 10 hours of combat, in a moment when it seemed that there was no chance of salvation, their Primarch returned to those defending. Having endured 10 hours in space without a helmet, Guilliman stood before his legion, ablaze with fury. The Ultramarines' commanders barely managed to persuade their Primarch to help them unite all defenders instead of merely slaughtering the enemies. With the miraculous return of the Primarch, the Ultramarines saw a glimmer of hope for a successful escape from this massacre and for the restoration of the defense on Calth. Meanwhile, on the surface of the planet itself, the Word-Bearers orchestrated a massacre. In the first 12 hours, about 100,000 Ultramarines were killed, and the Word-Bearers controlled all strategically important locations on the planet. At their disposal were not only the Astartes forces but also legions of Titans and Knights, as well as masses of cultists and traitors from the Imperial army. It seemed that the war was lost, but the remaining forces loyal to the Imperium could still resist. With great effort, Guilliman's sons tried to sell their lives as dearly as possible. Small pockets of resistance gradually merged with each other. In a desperate attack on the traitor forces, the Ultramarines and the Mechanicum managed to regain control over the entire planet's defense system, and in one instant the Emperor's wrath was unleashed upon the Word-Bearers. Finally, gaining an advantage on the planet's surface, the defense guns were directed at the Word-Bearers' fleet. They destroyed ship after ship. This included the flagship of Cor Ferron, the infidus Imperator. That's why Cor Ferron decided to retreat. Guilliman, in turn, not willing to let such an important target escape, tasked the Master of the First Order of Ultramarines, Marius Gage, with taking a cruise of the Macraggie's honour and pursuing them. What became of this pursuit would only be known to Guilliman many years later. In the meantime, communication between the fleet and the Ultramarines' ground forces was restored. Coordinating their actions, the Space Marines finally managed to mount a worthy defence against the traitors. But then, alarming news began to reach Robot Guilliman. The Word-Bearers bombarded the Calth system's suns, making it unstable. The star sent radioactive winds onto the surface of the already battered planet. Furthermore, requests for help started to arrive from nearly all 500 worlds within the Ultramar system. For the Primarch, it became clear that Calth was not the heretics' only target. The most terrifying news was the approaching powerful warp storms around Calth. If the Ultramarines did not leave within the next few hours, they might not be able to escape this system for a long time. The Primarch decided to load the remaining Titan, Mechanicum, and a large part of his legion's forces onto the fleet. Those who remained were ordered to descend into the underground cities and continue purging the planet of brothers who had succumbed to chaos. The so-called Underground War would continue for a full 10 years following this moment. Before leaving the orbit of Calth, Guilliman vowed to return here and rebuild this world anew, that the traitors would receive their deserved punishment and vengeance would be enacted, and many years would pass before the Primarch would have such an opportunity again.